Now we're going to do some work on this wooden fuselage. In the background you can hear our vacuum pump kicking in and off. We're making carbon fiber parts. But in the course of making that video, there's times when we're just waiting for parts to come out of the mold, and this is one of them. So we're going to do some work on trying to get I'm trying to evaluate exactly how I want to do this. This is the piece we cut off the plug. So I'm guessing, and because I'm inventing this as I go along, this is going to be the first thing, is I want to cut the matching piece off the back of this part so that when I go to join these up, I might even get away with using the same piece on both fuselages, but I don't know for sure. And since it's a relatively easy part to make, I'm not even going to worry if they don't exactly line up. But I'm going to definitely need to take this little piece out. Now again, I'll measure both sides, the idea being that when this is done, I can flip this up and possibly have the choice of using this. But again, in the worst case scenario, we'll make two pieces. These are half an hour to make. And the other choice is we can make two rudders then. But of course, as many interchangeable parts as we possibly can make, that would always be choice one. So the first step is going to be to cut this piece off and make sure it's an exact match for the part that's going to be on the carbon fiber fuselage. Now I'm going to leave, you can see the amount, I'm going to leave just a little bit of extra material, so in essence I can do a final sanding or a fine tuning when I actually have the part done. I'm trying to score this with a new blade so I don't have to repair the end. But remember, there's 64th plywood down at the end here, so I want to score it as neatly as possible anyway. Yeah, I'm still going to have to dress it off, but now I'm trying to dress this off as much as I can. Again, I've left a little extra material. And we'll hope that we'll have some interchangeability, but if we don't, if we need to make that separate part again, I'm trying to think this through every step of the way. I certainly don't want to have to make two tails if I don't have to, especially if the first one comes out real nice. And we're going to be doing a real tricked out tail on this. You know, one of the things I wanted to check right away, since I'm referencing off the bottom of the fuselage, which I know is parallel to the top, the thing I want to check that's parallel is that we haven't created by having, I don't want to wind up with that or that. So I'm just doing a rough check before I put that piece in there that's going to hold a stab in place. And again, I'll do this. This is the kind of thing I want to be as accurate as possible here, because once I put that piece in, relatively close. Just move this back just a little bit. Again, I'm referencing up off the table. What I'm trying to avoid is building any kind of twist in. Relatively close. Now if it wasn't, if for instance I wound up with that being up, I would have to take the low side, in this case the side that's high, and try to get it that I take the high side off, I should say. You can tell it's been a long work day. Get the high side down, so like a seesaw until I have it in dead neutral. But in this case, the one time in my whole life here, it probably worked out pretty good on the first shot. As a double check against the top to make sure I want to see that I have relative parallel dimension in this, and if all of these dimensions are relatively parallel, then I'll feel comfortable putting that piece of the support that actually will support the tail in position. This is the plan, the rough outline plan. Even though we're going to be doing a molded kind of a tail, again, I want that. I want to get my reference point here. That's going to go all the way to the back. as far forward as it can go. Now the next thing is I'm going to lay out that piece in a piece of multiple grain, cross grain 64th plywood. I won't be able to put the installing holes into that piece until I actually have the tail built, because I want to line up the tail and drill the tail and that piece at the same time. So the next step on this is going to be to just lay out a flat piece of wood with the grain going in various directions. We've done that many times. And I'm thinking this piece should be at least 3/32, 1/8 inch if you use ordinary plywood, 3/32 if you do your own laminate piece. And we'll be laminating this up with pieces of 64th plywood. The thing I want to do is make a slightly oversized pattern out of a piece of scrap balsa. Leave it a little bit oversized. And then I'll have this as my template to cut out the laminates of plywood. I always like to make it oversized, and I always like to get just a little bit, and since we're just using this for a pattern, I want this to be a pattern, so when Elliot draws up the plans, we get as many of these little pieces on as possible. Just save you a lot of layout time if you actually do want to build a plane. Now let's see, I want to press fit, but I don't want it spreading apart. And I want a little extra material in the back, and that looks like I have it. Even if we were just making a wooden fuselage version, I'd want to save a template for each part we make. And mark, obviously, each one of you 2 years later or something, you forget, I forget tomorrow. Anyway, now we're just going to lay this up out of the multi-grain plywood that we've done many times before. And it's a good time to use up your scraps. You can use up all our scraps, but we want each laminate of plywood to have the grain in a different direction, so I need to go through the scrap box and find a bunch with grains in various directions. Of course, trick one, always leave the original template just a little bit oversized whenever you do one of these cross grain laminates. Now one good way to lay this out is put the thick CA on one side. Notice that I just laid it on. Now this one has the grain going in a different direction. And just put 1 or 2 drops of kicker right in the center of it. It'll tend to kick out from the center out then, instead of from the inside in. It looks like we're going to need about 5 laminates. Now as I do each one, of course I'm leaving that original line on, and just let them be a little bit oversized. I can take it down with the belt sander, with the Dremel, by hand anyway, but I don't want to leave on. I don't want to try to trim it down to the line until I have all the pieces laminated. Now it looks like we need one now with the grain going front to back, and maybe with the grain the opposite the other way, and then we'll see how stiff this becomes. Next step is, even with all these laminates here, go over to the belt sander, dress this all off, and make sure it's a nice press fit in, not a sloppy fit that I have to fill a joint with glue. And it looked like 4 laminates are enough. This is as rigid as can be, but if you've never made this kind of material before, this is about the 3rd laminate with the grains. Then you actually have 12 plies here. It really turns out to be strong material, and you got to try to find some creative ways to use it. Need to fine tune right up to that line. Go do a test fit, make sure I have the fit. If not, take a little more off. Last little amount that I need to take off. I don't want to take too much off. Again, I want that nice, relatively tight press fit. I know this is the top. What I'm going to do on the bottom of it is put my 2 little triangle supports along the edge, and that just gives me a lot more glue area to work with. I don't want to have a thin glue area. Having that little triangulation in there be well worth the extra little weight. But to create that triangulation, it's easy just to glue the piece in right onto a piece of nice, soft, relatively soft wood anyway. I'll do both sides, then trim this away on the belt sander so it's dead 90 degrees. Okay, that's ready to trim to the square position. Now I know here that I have 90-degree edges. Now I want to just make a radius on both of these parts. Now I can start the curve on this. It's kind of like an inside fillet. And I can finish it up with one of my little sanding wedges. Sticky back paper here. Certainly not going to need a whole piece for this, but I can pick a radius that I'm comfortable with here. And this will add a tremendous amount of strength, almost no weight at all. And that combination, if you use it often enough, it's like being able to score touchdowns whenever you want. It's kind of like, gives you a good chance of winning a game. You can see that fits right up in there. Now I always want to seal all these edges before we actually install this part. Just let it soak right in, no kicker. And wipe it with a Q-tip. Now I did the same check that this is parallel before I put the glue, the final glue joint on. I think that'll make for, once that the glue dries now, the thin CA, that's going to make for a really nice strong joint. Triangulated corners. I can just dress this edge off now. Now the next thing I want to do a fitting on. We had our top block that we molded, this the original one, in this shell that confined it to keep it from expanding. It's been sitting here for about a month, I guess. Anyway, we want to look at this, prepare it, trim it, get it ready to be installed. The only thing we've done on this so far is a rough fit. The first thing I want to do is get it taped in place. Second thing I want to do is answer the phone. President masking tape. We have a little bit extra material in the front. I've taped it down about every, I don't know, 6 inches or so. Now the next step is in between the tape, just get a couple of drops of thin CA, tack it in place. What I try to do is get in between each row of tape, put a little compression on it. And obviously as soon as it kicks, just work my way down to the next spot. And the last thing, of course, pull off the tape one by one and do in between. Now usually there's a gain over a block, because a block usually will be a lot harder to get lined up than a molded shell, but these seem to be going in pretty nice. Now with that tack glued on both sides, I can remove that, get a little bit of pressure on there. Now one thing nice about a take-apart plane, again, you find advantages as you go along, is I can get inside the joints when I get the whole outside completely joined, and you can see there's a relatively decent fit. One of the things it allows me to do is get inside, and I can work this joint on the whole inside here, and that'll be a big help. So I'll get the inside of the joint. The outside of the joint should be a lot stronger than a non-take-apart plane, even though this is not going to be as strong as a normal plane once it's all glued in position. We're trying to make from this point forward as strong as possible. Anything from here forward I want to be like a rock and steady before I cut that piece out. And you can saturate the whole thing. This is probably the last thing we're going to get to do tonight, so tomorrow I'll do the final sand in, but I can get both sides of this joint. Now I was amazed when I ran the inside glue seam, and I just held it up like this and ran it right down. Boy, that you can see the glue seam inside, right on the carbon fiber. Now tomorrow when I come back down, should have a session after work, and what I want to do is I'll trim the back piece, hopefully get this all sanded in, figure out what I want to do next. I put a whole lot of extra glue up under the front by the blind nuts. This is one of the things that you don't want to take any chances that part is going to be weakened or compromised in some way. You can see now, as I'm building this, I'm starting to realize how many advantages there are. Obviously there's disadvantages too, but you need a new challenge, and if you're building the same thing over and over and over, this is a wonderful new challenge to try to figure out how to do this and the steps and the sequence, and by adding 2 fuselages into the program makes it really difficult. See you tomorrow. Alright, we're back in the shop, and boy, no matter how many times I watch this footage of Miss Ashley, it's sad. Yeah, for anybody that doesn't know, I can really relate to Gary Levitz's death. My dad was killed in a plane when I was 7 years old, private plane. Anyway, get on with this. I want to take this over to the... First I'm going to put the engine and the spinner and all the hardware in, and then dress off this joint. Next thing is to get this joint as smooth and neat as possible, and I don't want to thin the shell any more than I have to, because on a take-apart plane, this shell carries a lot of the load over the top of the wing. It isn't like you glue it on. There'll just be a mount point front and back. So I want to keep that relatively rigid. Let me get the engine. Whenever I do one of these, a final carving, you can see I've left myself plenty of material. I always find it easier to just cover the whole spinner with some masking tape, and then if I hit it with the sanding block as I'm working that curve in, it really doesn't do any damage. It also leaves a little bit extra that when I take the final piece, do the final shaping, I can take this off and then just do the final shaping of it. And that's been a good way for me in the past to get a real nice fit from the spinner into the fuselage. That'll make carving this in a lot easier. One of the things I always try to do is just get everything roughed in, keep moving it and looking at from every angle that it's a blend. So I usually start down at one side. As soon as I see I'm hitting the spinner with the sandpaper, that would be handy if you had an old spinner. I don't have an old one. It's all chewed up, or just as easy to put the masking tape on anyway. But getting that blend into the spinner, I think, is just, boy, in a finished model, it's one of the things you really want to have really nice. And the reason we want to have the wood fuselages, you know, as accurate and as good as possible, because it also gives me a comparison if I've made any progress, or if the plane flies better with one fuselage, the wood, than the carbon. I'll have a square one to work off at the time. As I'm sanding this out, I want to show this little trick. I let these little ridges fill up with sawdust. Once they're filled with sawdust, I can take some thin CA and just leave the sawdust in there, because trying to get that joint, that perfect joint, obviously that's what we're all striving for. Let that, now here's another piece, just another one right there. Let's get a close up. See, it's kind of an imperfection in the way the joint sat. Let it fill up with sawdust, thin CA, just let it fill right in, no kicker. Wipe it with a Q-tip. And the second or third time you do that, you should have a very nice blend, and I'll just work my way down the whole fuselage on that. Now on some of the areas where the hardwood, you really have to take a little bit of material away here, it's just easier, you know, at least for me it's easier, get the tip of that sanding tool in there. You know, if you can see the material, because I don't have to go out over the balsa wood. I would only use this on the hardwood. And it just helps me get a little bit better blend in there. Anytime, what I always try to do when I have the final, what I think I'm close to the final blend here, I want to harden this whole area up, because I don't want to be going hard to soft, hard to soft. Now where the plywood doublers end, this edge here always tends to come through the paint. So one of the things you can do to keep it from coming through the paint is just saturate the whole area. Remember, then what you're doing is making it hard to hard, and you have a better chance. I shouldn't say you won't see the joint. You have a better chance of not seeing the joint working in that thin CA. And this is really the tip that's worth its weight in gold. When you get those nice smooth blends, for instance right here, you're going from hard to soft, and that's where it'll always tend to crack. Go look at planes that are a year or two old, and when you look at some, like a couple of the planes that I have that are like tradition, that are 10 years old and don't have a crack there, that's one of the reasons. A good trick. Now I'm taking a little break here. I thought I'd mention something. I haven't been putting Bert and Ernie on the videos for the last 6 months or so. One by one, all three of the fish, Bert, Ernie, and Rusty, have passed away. And these are two fish that were born in the pond, and they've kind of grown up. They're a pair. They're from the same litter. But I just noticed today, and I know we're not going to have young fish here. These fish are typically a little bit too young to mate. But they are a matched pair. And I noticed over on the, see those little white things on the rock? Those are fish eggs. So it's only a matter of time here before, look how they hang out together. And you know, what's important to me, these guys keep me company all day long while I'm playing with airplanes and stuff. They really are a joy to have around. And you know, the last one to die was Rusty. They all had those tumors that are very typical for that breed of fish. These fish tend to be a little healthier. And I really look forward to raising a batch of babies here. At some future time, I'm going to have to get some plant life in here if I want to have them. The orange one is a male. The white one is a female, and these were both, look how they swim together. I love this. I just think they're so nice. Anyway, just share that with you. We're going to get back to working on that fuselage. Final thought. They need a name. See, Bert and Ernie had a name in Rusty. Now this guy I've named because he's been here. When Rusty was the only one left, I brought him into the tank so that Rusty wouldn't be alone. Then he was alone for a couple of days until it got warm enough to take the orange guy out of the pond. But they need a name. They need a name. So we're going to have a name the fish. We call him BWF, Big White Fish, and he is pretty big. But we need a name, like a Bert and Ernie kind of catchy name for these two guys. So if anybody has a great name, send it in and you win a free trip to John Brodeck's for the contest. John will feed you and launch your plane for you. Also keep by my desk, I always keep a picture of my cat Buster. You know I'm a sucker for animals, a sucker for fish, a sucker for everything. And the time we have on Earth together is limited, and when it's gone, it's gone. So the main thing, my point is, enjoy the time you have with your friends, your family, and your pets. Enjoy it now while you have it. No reason to wait till tomorrow. These things that I've learned is when I'm sanding by a sanding bench or on a table, I always try to roll up a blanket, hold one hand on this, and this gives me a little cushion to work off. It's a lot easier for me to work on a pillow like this. When I'm starting to do the final sanding, I'd like to avoid putting any more dings in this if possible. The next thing here is just to get a final sanding on everything. What I'm trying to do is get a little bit of glass cloth up around the nose here, some thin CA, because this is another spot where it tends to crack. And I sure, after all this work, I don't want to wind up with a paint job sitting there with a big crack, and then of course when a wooden fuselage, oil gets in right away. I've just been going back and forth over this nose to try to get a perfect blend, except for the thickness of the tape, of course. And I've been adding little bits of fiberglass where I sanded through, because I want this area up here to be as strong as possible. This is where you hold it, you flip the prop, all of a sudden you have a crack there. Now you can see how nice, well, how close that joint is. But now, once I take the tape off, I can take the spinner off and just do the final little dressing on this with the spinner off. And how nice that just blends right in. Boy, that, if there's one thing that looks real nice, you look at the front of, well, even Strega, and it just comes to a perfect point. Well, I love that. Ted Fancher's plane, another one that I really like the nose section of. How that just blends right in. The last thing here is to check with the tape off of the spinner that I have that real smooth contour, and I'll be ready to put the lid on this. That little fiberglass up there, believe me, in the final analysis, when you see that crack and the plane is all buffed out, next time you're at the Nats, look at how many planes, including my own, have cracked right up there. Makes me crazy. I make sure I still have that clearance, nothing's rubbing. Now I try to look at this from a lot of different angles. Looking for that blend. Alright, the next step, I'm going to take the motor out and soak inside in here with some thin CA to harden up this wood. Again, that nose section really does take a beating. On my planes it does anyway. The idea here is I want to get this part of the wood fuel-proofed with thin CA, and I want to make a little former so if any oil were to drip in here, it's not going to wind up leaking back into the cockpit area. I just need to make a little former for up in there. Just make a little pattern first, and then I'll leave that pattern in a box for Elliot so he can draw the plans. Yeah, I have that little former in there. I have all this soaked with thin CA, wiped with the Q-tips, try to harden that wood up. The next thing I want to do, I want to put, same as I did on all the other Spitfires, a little thin piece of carbon fiber along this edge. I have this real thin carbon fiber laminate that just lays right in there real nice. And it gives you a nice hard edge to mate the cowling to. What I did, I got a bunch of samples from this company CST in California. I'm going to, sooner or later, in fact, I hope very soon, become a dealer for their products and sell this. This is all different thicknesses. You can see the thinnest of which it's almost like paper. They make some 7,000s. George Spark handles this also. And some 14,000s. Again, just by laying this in the edge, this gives you a really, really nice edge to work off. And it attaches beautifully with CA. Before you attach it with CA, you want to just rough this up with a piece of sandpaper though. Don't glue it just the way it is. Now, this material is real good for a lot of other purposes, but I just thought I'd mention it's made with about a 35% resin content, which is really, really strong in terms of strength to weight. And just the smallest little reinforcement of this. Now, I just was comparing a piece of 14. This is a piece of 14. The nice thing is if you have a curve, you can just lay in 2 pieces of 7 and you get the same effect as having a 14. But really, really good material. Good for reinforcing little parts like the cowling edges or any structural thing that needs to be totally reinforced without adding a lot of weight. You want to roughen up. Now see, this has 2 sides. This material always has 2 sides. A smooth side, which you don't want to be bothered with. You want that on the outside. You want to, and be careful not to get a splinter. Rough this up with some rough sandpaper. The rougher you make it, the better of a grip you'll tend to get. Because it's only going to be as strong. It's not going to be any stronger than the joint. Otherwise the part just delaminates. Now I just tack this in with thick CA. let some thin CA run down in that area. And while it's drying, oh, I see it's kicking off already. The sandpaper keeps it from sticking. That's a good way to install it. Most of the times you try to do this, you wind up gluing your fingertips to it. And obviously we'll trim this off. I want to go along this edge also because these are edges where the cowling is going to rest and our cowling supports. Material is a little difficult to cut, so it really wears blades out in a hurry too. That really does a good job of reinforcing that edge. Almost no weight at all. And of course what I want to do is keep this, have that piece with the back cut. I want to keep this edge as smooth as possible so we can get that final cowling fit when it's time to do that. And the next step I want to do on this, because I'm near the end of a session, I want to get the nose glassed. And I'm trying to evaluate in my own mind where I want this to begin and end, but I have it blocked up off the table. It's just easier for me to work that way while it's up on blocks. Again, what I'm going to try right now is using West resin, the 105-206, just to see if that resin system is going to work better on fiberglassing. I'm going to use 1/2 ounce cloth and probably put a double layer, maybe from about here forward double, and the next end ending just beyond the wing. And from that point on, that's where the canopy will wind up being anyway. One, of course, because this is the first time we're doing a glassing job with the West resin, there's about a 1/2 hour of pot life, so I don't need to really rush along. But that age-old thing of when you think epoxy's mixed, mix it for 2 minutes more. Get the edges, get the bottom, because we're going to be putting it on with a brand new, one of those little rubber spatulas. And I'd like to draw off as much epoxy as possible. Just look at what the consistency. This is a little thinner than in the past we've used SIG. This is a little thinner, but I think it's going to work fine. Always a good idea to use a brand new spreader each time. These have a very, now I use them on the fiberglass work. Yeah, you can use it over and over and over, but if you don't have a nice smooth edge, especially when you're drawing out that real light cloth, it can be a problem. These are under $1 anyway, so it's not a big deal. Reading the West Systems literature that they send with the epoxy, and one of the things that I had heard in the past was that you could take this, and actually you could take any epoxy and thin it with alcohol or acetone, and right in the Gouchon literature it tells you, Gouchon is West Systems by the way, it tells you in very big capital letters, if you thin it with acetone or alcohol, it reduces the strength of the material in by exactly the amount you thin the resin. So what I'm going to do, you can see how thick this is. I'm going to put it on thick and then use heat. Now heat usually is the best way I know of, especially when glass in the middle of a wing. Just get everything painted with the epoxy. The whole front completely covered with the epoxy. Just slobbered it on. I haven't tried to be cute about getting it on nice and neat. This is the part that usually can be a pain in the neck if you can't get it to drape the way you want. In fact, I see it, some little strings hanging on there already. Of course, this is really a nice time to have one of those helpers that you never seem to have when you need one. You can always pick it up and drop it back down. That looks okay. The idea is to work it like a sunburst. Work from the center out to the edges in all dimensions. When you have big bubbles like this, you can just pick it up and start from the center of the fuselage and work your way down. You can see you can get almost all the wrinkles out. A brand new little squeegee really seems to help here. Now, because of the unique shape here, I can start in the center, and you can see how much comes off. A handy thing to have is an empty gallon can or an old gallon can of anything. And you see, when you keep at this for a little while, even before you use heat, you can get almost every little bit of this off. A little glass and technique you can use in so many areas of modeling. Even if you decide you want decided you want a wooden fuselage, and you want to glass the nose, being able to get all that epoxy off and get as much off. By the way, it looks like this West Systems resin handles a lot nicer than SIG. I'll know tomorrow when we go to sand it. Again, you should always let it dry at least 24 hours, so we may even give this an extra day to dry. We could work on a tail and a rudder tomorrow. I always try to plan my next day's workout. At the end of one session, I'm already planning what I'm doing on the next session. You can see we still have some wrinkles up here. But I basically have a half hour now that I can manipulate this and just keep squeegeeing. Now I'll double up that area up on the nose. Again, I'm very conscious of the planes that I build. I really expect them to last forever. They really are not one-season wonders. And I don't care if that means they're a little heavier or a little, in some way, harder to build. Because the thought of building a plane and only having it last one season just doesn't, just not my thing, I guess. I'm trying to pull these little wrinkles out as I go along. Keep the little bottle with the alcohol handy for wiping your fingertips. Don't wash your hands, but for getting a little bit off your fingertips, it's handy. We're always going from the middle out. It definitely looks like the West Systems resin is a better deal for than the traditional stuff we've always used, the SIG. We'll know after we sand it. But since I've already sanded this resin in about 200 nobler cowlings, it really does sand nice. Okay, so we got most of that off. Now I can just dress off the edges. Now what I did where the glass ended, you always want to trowel some resin out past the end of the glass cloth. Now you see, as soon as you put any heat on it, even just a little bit, get rid of this, what happens? It gets a little more liquidy, more watery, and you can get even more off. And if you look at the top of that can, it looks like we've taken off more than we even started putting on. Again, it really helps if you have a helper here, or in my case, I could put a rag or something, a towel, something on that back piece to keep it from jiggling. Now in the past, when we've been glassing wings, especially foam wings, and by the way, it looks like Midgley, I got the report today, he's well on the way to having a mold for the carbon wings. He's making a mold for carbon fiber cardinal wings. I'm not going to try to do two things at once this year. One is enough. If we don't even know if we can get this one working. But that's the thrill of it all. At least the thrill for me. Hey, and I love my new fish. Boy, I've been watching him all day. He's as happy as can be over there. And every once in a while, now one of the nice things about having things on video, I have video of all the fish that in this last year have passed away. And I can always pop it in the TV and look at them when they were young and healthy. Maybe someday they'll be looking at pictures of me when I was young and healthy. I don't know. And boy, you think about Gary Levitt's dying, and I'm reading that book. Just gotta mention this. That book, Fly Low, Fly Fast. Wow. There's a chapter in there about the Red Baron that'll make you cry. When Steve Hinton crashed the Red Baron. Anyway, now I want to get that extra piece up on the nose. Notice I didn't do the nose, I left the extra resin up there. And again, this is really more for the making the model a 10-year model. This is probably overkill, but when you see a model that's 10 years old and the paint isn't all cracked and peeled and oil soaking in, and all of a sudden this looks like this little extra work paid off. Now I didn't trowel off the extra resin up on the nose here, but what'll happen when you're doing a double layer like this, you get the old heat out, put it on the low setting, and you can probably see that the resin underneath is going to come right up. See it's coming right up? And boy, there is nothing worse than building a plane with an ultralight nose. You get all done, you're ready to fly the plane, and it needs an ounce of lead in the nose. There we go. Now it's just coming right up. Oh boy, let me get the phone. Now, without the President Nixon interruption here, I hope we haven't lost all the time we're trying to make up. One last little piece I want to put on. This covers usually the area right around the motor mounts. Is overkill within overkill, but again, I'm hoping, assuming I have to use this fuselage, or I want to, or I have the choice of, you know, with a take-apart plane here, here's what's nice. Think of things that are real nice. Normally you have to glass it with the wing in a way, and this gets to be a real pain in the neck. And because I've really basically gotten all the resin out of here, I'm just painting some more on. You can see it's already starting to get thick. Yeah, you think of this an advantage of a take-apart plane. You never have to deal with that wing and tail being in the way. Okay, so we have 3 layers on the front, and we've kind of tapered it back. And we've got almost all, just by being meticulous, right up to the point of time where the epoxy starts to turn to cheese. And I think another thought, you're always better off if you're looking for the maximum strength to weight. 2 or 3 layers of 1/2 ounce instead of 1 layer of the thicker, even though this is more work. You can get more of the ratio of e-glass to resin, and you can always squeeze out that last little bit. And we'll come back to this tomorrow. This end joint where it ends, there's always a couple of threads. If you want to, you can just wipe that with a little bit of alcohol, but I don't want to, after reading that Gouchon thing, I'm not even going to wipe it with alcohol. I don't want to deteriorate the strength here. Because once I cut that piece apart from the wing, I don't want this to turn into a, you know, a seesaw or anything. Anyway, we'll let this dry 24 hours. We'll come back to it tomorrow after work. And what I did tonight is I laid this up by the heating vent up here just to get the heating vent, get all that heat blowing on there. That should cure it up so tomorrow when we come back down here, I hope this is going to be ready to go. Okay, now before I even try to sand this, I want to find out, because what would happen is the SIG resin would typically take 1 day to cure, and in the worst case scenario you'd let it sit the second day. Well, this has really only sat really overnight, and I want to see. Now, a good way to tell is I'll cut a little piece of this out, and I can basically, from this little piece, I can tell, oh yeah, if it doesn't stick to your hand at all, you can't leave a fingerprint in the epoxy, that's ready to sand. So what I'll do is, with a brand new blade, one of these brand new XL blades, get this trimmed as carefully as possible, trim off all the extra. And I'm trying to do this as neatly as possible. And then I want to see how this resin is going to sand out. Now, if it becomes part of our standard building practice to use this resin, I would say this resin is definitely easier to use than the SIG. And I'm going to, in the future, be talking to John Brodak about maybe selling this as a fiberglass and resin, and handling the lightweight cloth, maybe even making up a little kit. One of the things he might want to consider. And since I know he's home watching these videos right now, John, this is a good system. And you can see the nice finish that's left on there. But even more important, from all the squeegeeing and heat, you can get a real look. There isn't a lot of sanding. In fact, we want to do as little sanding as possible on this. I don't want to sand and break through the cloth. I just want to sand till I touch the cloth and fill the rest with dope. Yeah, that looks like it's going to work well. And all the dripping and drooling doesn't, oh, I'll have to trim all these edges off and everything. I'll get that all done off camera. I need to clean up the edges here. One of the tests right away, before we even sand it over by the bench, is to see if we're getting powder. If you're seeing this powder, if you see powder, you know that's ready to sand. And I'm trying to maintain these real nice edges. Now, even up in the front here, where I have 3 layers up in the front. This is a whole different animal now, nice and rigid. And it powdered right off, less than 24 hours. How careful you always tend to get a little bubble somewhat like that. Now, even though this is going to be covered by the fillet, one of the things you can do real quickly, get some thin CA underneath it. And just get it to stick right down before you even do the sanding. As soon as you hit that with the Q-tip, it lays right down. Now what will happen here is we're going to actually have the cloth going underneath the fillet. It'll make sanding that fillet out a piece of cake. Any little spot, in fact, I'll look at any other. Looks like we could put a little bit right under here too. Same little thing. Doing all these little touch-ups. So this looks like it's now going to be a new standard for our fiberglassing system using the West resin. And by the way, it's a lot less expensive. Once you buy a quart of this stuff, you have it for life. Hey, that looked like it really worked nice. That's ready to sand. Hardest spots to get to blend in. And notice how the cloth ends here. See if you can see this up close. But I've troweled that extra resin off a couple inches off so that I don't have a step here. Now, one of the things you can always use, I have these sanding sponges that are kind of soft, and this is used sticky back paper, but I want to get a blend. Now, what if I use a hard piece here, I'm going to wind up taking too much of this resin away. I want to keep the block on the fiberglass part and let it drift out into here as I make the motion. I don't want to sand this way. In other words, the worst thing to do is sand the wood and then go up this step. And this is a really good trick. This will work every time. Notice the sandpaper never goes over onto the raw wood. Nice soft block. Because when we silk span the back half of this, the silk span will go up over this. I don't want to have a step. All I need to do is get 90% of it. By the way, you can see how this West Systems resin is. I'm real impressed with this. This is the first time I've used this on a real project other than just, when you see powder, that kind of powder, that resin is just coming right off of there. Really nice. Really very easy to sand. The front, because we did all this shaping with the hard block, there's still going to be a hard spot, but we can get the blend between where there's one layer of cloth and 2 layers of cloth. And this is only a matter of maybe 15 minutes to do the whole fiberglass area. I don't know if you can, you really get a feeling for just how that powders right off. And if you've ever tried to sand a fiberglass area and it's chewing gum, well, you know, you can make yourself crazy. You can see how that is just the easiest thing to sand in the whole world. Boy, that is just like powder, like sand and filler. Not sure how much of this you can really see, but this sanded out, boy, the feel. And again, I do all the joints. Right now, if I were to close my eyes, there's no way I can feel any joints whatsoever. That looks like it's just going to be just peaches and cream. Where this ends, of course, there's a little indentation there, but as soon as we tissue and dope that, that'll be gone. Now the next step is I need to trim this piece. I want to start making up the tail piece and the fin and rudder. I thought about long and hard trying to use the same piece on both. And I thought, geez, I really ought to make 2 of them. Just quit fooling around, because by the time all the work of making them both fit each other, and one will be a 1/64 of an inch thicker or thinner, I'll be shimming it. Be just as easy to make 2. So I'm going to get a nice zona saw cut right. I'll always use a tape edge to maintain that 90 degrees that we want to maintain. Here what I did, I just scored this to make sure the blade isn't going to wander as I do this, because I want to get a relatively nice, neat cut here. Now I'm not really going to be able to reuse this piece because it's too small. I'll probably have to just mold up, and I have the mold. I can mold up another piece for the back here. Now this is one of the take-apart features that I want to carefully think about piece by piece as I do this, because I might want to use the same, well, it's basically the Kaz and Paul Walker used the same thing. Basically a universal thing, and I don't know who gets the credit for inventing it, but I want to make sure that I get as much integrity back here as I can. I don't want this to be twisting, and so obviously I need to dress this edge off next. Believe me, I did want to have as many parts of this interchangeable, but when I thought about how many angles and the location of the pin and the rudder and fin, and it just seemed like it would be a lot easier to just replicate the part. Especially being that we have a mold for this little shell, I don't know if we're going to be able to use it. First thing is to check that I have a 90 degree here. I don't want to have an angle one way or another. You know, I can see I'm not exactly at 90 degrees where I want to be. I need to dress off, if you can see the angle, I need to take a little bit of material off right there to get my 90 degrees. And I'll do this in little small slivers because I don't want to have to put a filler bulkhead in there. Again, because the first time we're going through this operation, we're kind of inventing it as we go along. The second and third one, if we replicate this, would go a whole lot quicker. The next thing is going to be to lay out the rough shape of this former. You can look right through the back. Look how nice those shells, boy, those formed shells. Oh, I just love that. With the carbon reinforcement and that glue seam doubled up. I just really think that's nice. Anyway, got to lay out this former. I'll just do it roughly with a piece of scrap wood first, and then I can make up the real part. Got the triangulation parts in here. Now these are the plans to Cosmonato's plane that Elliot Scott sent me. And I'm just trying to look for some ideas or some way that I'm trying to look. He uses a dowel up here as the locator pin and a hollow balsa block, 256 screws to hold the tail down, and his bolt pattern is, we're going to figure this out and see. He's using an eighth inch balsa former with a hole. Well, I'm going to probably try to use something a little bit different. I'm going to try to use, I was thinking of maybe 16th balsa with a little piece of 64th plywood reinforcement. Since I don't have a former going all the way up and down the fuselage, I want it to be right in the end here. So we're going to have to modify, change a little bit from the way Kaz is doing it anyway. Template, I'm trying to use the sea grain part of this wood. Even for a template, I'd like to have it, sea grain will make a better template. Now I just need to reduce this by 1/8 of an inch. And I should have my pattern. Leave it a little oversized and use a sanding stick to just get a nice press fit. I always like to make these things just a little bit oversized and then try for at least a press fit. Now as soon as I get this that it's a nice tight fit, I'll laminate in a piece of 64th plywood to this. Still a little bit oversized. And I made a usable part, 16th, with some sea grain in it, and some 64th plywood. Now the reason I want the 64th plywood is so when that pin goes in here, I have some resistance to elongating the hole, and it'll hold it a lot firmer. Again, because this is the first time through, it could be that we don't need that. This is overkill. Well, for right now, that isn't hurting anything. Over-engineering the first part is not a problem anyway. And in the carbon fuselage, this piece is already carbon, so we just need to drill a hole in it. Piece glued in, I just tacked it, and I want to see that I have a 90 degree. Now I can put the final glue joint from the inside. I can just drip CA down in there and get, now notice how nice that's catching in there. And I've got a really, well, relatively good fit around here. I want a good solid glue joint there. What I need to do is make this piece up, and what I thought I'd try, rather than make this at an 1/8 inch, I can make the formers just a little bit wider. Maybe make this out of, I think we're going to try 16th here. Since there's not much strength required, well, I'll go for 3/32. I'll be a big hero. And make the formers just a little bit wider, and then if I need this little piece up here, I can just carve that separately, or I could even mold it, make a whole nother piece of it on the mold. But I basically want to have, in other words, the original part, I just need to thicken up the formers on it. Little jobs that's really a nuisance is little, see this little piece up here, little pieces of CA stick to the pad, and as I'm using it, I'll obviously from this point in the plane on, I don't want to have any little, well, I don't really ever want them, but what I've found is just by getting rid of all these little pieces, I've tried a lot of ways of doing it, this seems like the easiest way to get rid of little globberoos of glue. Now I'm going to leave the wood in place that we're going to cut away for the tail. By the way, I am going to buy a company that sells pens that write. Boy, the pens, I have about 30 different prints, they all stink. Anyway, I'm going to have to lay in, trying to plot this out, and it probably would be to my advantage right away to lay this in, because this is where it's, now what's going to happen is I need to allow for a 1/2 inch of tail. So the easiest way here that I can see is to just leave the whole piece on and don't even fool with it. But obviously a piece will be removed afterward. This way I can get a nice reference point to it anyway. See, this is the thing, is figuring out how to go step 1, step 2, step 3. This is the most difficult part of the whole job. When you actually build a thing, that part of it, it's easy. Whenever I want to make one part exactly the same as the other, I just pin one right through into the cutting pad, trace it all out with a brand new blade, use a straight edge. I'll have 2 exact mirror images of each other. Then I just need to figure out. While I have the pieces still pinned together, this is a good time to get all the edges 90 degrees. Now I just have to, and I've been trying to think of an easy way to do it, figure out the formers. Again, if we were using 1/8 inch, we could just replicate the formers, but and we should have 2 exact matching parts this way. Now I fooled around a little bit trying to get these fits really nice, even though this part here I don't really care about. That's not going to be part of the, that's going to get cut away for the stamp. What I wanted to do, I thought about tack gluing these in place, and then I thought of another choice, and I guess this is going to work. Just tape them in place so I can make up the former thicknesses. This looks like it'll work. Anyway, I'll get both sides taped and I'll lay out from that I can pick all my former thicknesses. Except I just temporarily tack glued that in place so I could get the curve, and now I can use on a 90-degree triangle that'll maintain my 90 degrees. Drop in all the formers, and I'll even leave them oversized when I cut that piece out. I want those formers in there to maintain the shape, and then I'll take that little block and carve the block. I'm trying to maintain all my flat edges too at the same time I'm tack gluing this together. Oops. It would serve the same purpose if I just tack glued this in place, but I just think this is the easier of the two. Now the trick is get all of the angles 90 degrees and just drop these formers in, even though most of them are going to get cut away. This will hold it in place, really like a little fixture while I'm carving a block. And again, the whole trick here is when you do the cut, you use a 90-degree triangle. And that gives you all the formers. It should keep that relatively parallel. Always good to leave the dust on. In fact, this one, I just realized this one I can make a full former. See, live and learn. Okay, I got all the formers in. They're all at 90 degrees. The next thing, I want to get this block laid in here. And I want to make sure I get as nice a joint up front as I can. What I'm trying to do is cut it just oversized at a line, give myself a little extra room to carve. Now I could make up a shell, but then I'd have to wait overnight, and I got a couple hours left in this session. I don't want to hold up, take a break. But that would be one of the choices, to just make another shell and then cut the back end off. I wanted to really make sure that this joint was nice and tight and square. And I want to just tack, I had to tack this piece in place. I was afraid it would move with the carving, because I want to carve it right in position. Oop, just 2 or 3 little drops. We'll be ready to carve that piece up. Now this will just be a little baby, like making a plug. Now if I was going to, if this were the end of the session, the thing I would do is just make up another shell, but again, this is what's keeping me going. And in a lot of things like this, I don't like to lose a day waiting for a part to dry. Just as easy, take me 5-10 minutes. This will carve right up. This is a very simple, non-complex shape. Get it roughed out with a knife. The last little bit is always easy to do. Plane held on about a 45-degree angle. Then we'll be ready to pull this apart. Now even though these take-apart features, they seem like when you're making them, oh gee, you lose a whole day or a whole afternoon or something. But what happens though is somewhere down the road, there's a gain. Like anything in life, there's a give and a take, there's a plus and a minus. Well, the building time is a little more for a take-apart plane, but some of the features that you have, some of the options you have, like being able to replace the wing with a longer wing, a bigger wing. Now, at this point in time, I'm trying to plan out how I want to make the attachment piece. Probably similar to Kazzy's, maybe a little bit different. But since the people in Europe have been using this system for years, the people overseas, I just don't see any need to like really recreate this too much. And now I just need to pull all the tack glue joints apart, clean up the edges. We'll be ready to hollow that block out. Okay, ready to hollow this. I want to hollow this block out next. I always like to give myself a little reference line where I want to hollow to, using the end of my finger as a guide, and trying to get that one pen in about 2 million that writes. What a business to be in, the pen business. Anyway, what I think I'm going to wind up doing is leaving this end plug on here. And that'll give me a place to mount the little pin that I need. So I can just use this for a little reference guide when hollowing that out. Now what I like to do is get the big chunks out with one of these little scoop blades. And then the last little bit I'll get with the Dremel. The little battery powered Dremel is real handy for doing this. But I want to leave at least 1/8 of an inch wall because this piece is going to hold the whole rudder assembly on. These little battery wizards. So convenient. And having 2 of them now in the shop, not having to change the bits. I just leave the big grinder in one, the little grinder in the other one. I like to feel with my hand, always using my hand to find the soft spot, or you can hold it up to a light bulb and look, when you can almost start to see through it, you know that's probably the point at which you don't want to hollow it anymore. Those rubber polywog shapes really seem to be real handy to get in all these corners and angles. They also fit into that Black & Decker tool, but they're just too aggressive when they start cutting, and I sure would like not to go through, or as I'm always prone to say, go through as few places as possible. Al Rabe's saying used to be, if you don't go through a block in 4 or 5 places, it's probably too heavy, and I tend to agree with him. That's why I don't like blocks. But this actually is buying me a production day here, and since we've been busy with so many other things, not having to wait for the mold to cure, this will get me moving. Okay, we're ready to glue this on the back piece permanently then. That'll be the next step. To use the method that I always use when putting a block back on. Tape it in place first, Make sure you have all the seams accurate. And then of course the first thing, just tack it. Once you start putting a permanent seam on, to get it off, oh yeah. Such good little tips. Years ago, I have to confess, when I didn't think a lot of things through, this used to be one of the things I'd hate, is getting this seam. I'd see planes that had a finish on them like a mirror and you couldn't tell where the block ended and the fuse began. I never figured out how they did it. And what I can do, once that seam is done, see, I can run that glue seam inside here too. Same as I did on a fuselage. I know that's all lined up nice. I could run the whole seam in one shot. Let the dust from the Q-tips kick it off. Now by being able to run these glue seams on the inside, boy, that adds some integrity. I always let the glue ride around the corners, let it go all the way to the back. Pulling out all the stops tonight. I want to get this at least to a point where I know I have this attached to the back of the fuselage. Now what I did, I just pressed in a little piece of aluminum tubing, filled it with CA, put plenty of glue in the back so that this becomes like a bulkhead. And now I'm going to slide this in position. I took the front of it and marked it with an ink marker to press myself on a little mark so I can drill a corresponding hole right in the back of the bulkhead that's holding that on, that'll eventually hold this on in place. Now this really is a nice way to do it, but boy, that really is. Cassie knows, or whoever gets the credit for this. Anyway, that works real nice. Now, I want to put some kind of a bushing on here, because eventually this will wear this hole out. I got to look for a piece of oversized tubing or something I can make a bushing with in there. Now what I did, I have the next size bigger aluminum tubing. So what I want this to be, I'm going to cut a little sliver of this off and just soak it in CA. Hopefully get this perfectly centered so when this comes in, I mean this is overkill, but what will happen if you don't do this, eventually this is going to be rattling around and probably right at the nets the whole tail will fly off the plane or something. So I'll pay the price today and get this little sleeve in there. A good way to do this is I want to make a little relief, a little flute on this end. Whoops, I'm slipping, chop my finger up anymore here. So that this will act like a little funnel when I go to press this in position. Now there's some parts of this plane that are taking a lot longer than I thought they were, basically because I'm doing this for the first time. But this little assembly, to get this, I wanted a press fit. I wanted that you could pull a plane by this. And it looks like I've got a perfect wood fit here. Now what I need to do is figure out how I'm going to make the bulkhead at the bottom. I need to make a bulkhead in here. I'm probably looking at how I'm going to do this. A bulkhead in here with a blind nut and either a 440 or a 256 coming in. Kaz puts his in through the back. I think Paul Walker puts it in through the rudder. I don't know, we could probably have a little thing coming out the bottom, you wouldn't even see it. We're going to look at how this is. This is what's nice, and by the way, I want to thank Kaz again. Thank Elliot for sending me those plans. A lot of good ideas on those plans. Anyway, we've got relatively nice wood fits, but again, this little piece, you would think this is a half hour to make it. It took me, and it's really getting late into the night here. Getting ready for another cup of coffee. I'm working here. I went out on the back porch, and here's this giant box that UPS left, and what's in here is a set Frank McMillan donated as fully set, I'm not even going to open this tonight, it's too late, a set of SV-11 wings that are completely finished from a plane that had folded the wing, but the wings are in good shape. If we want to use them, or if Midgley wants to use them in his quest to make a mold for a carbon wing similar to Kaz's. Left this little recessed area in here because I want to make a little former, and I want to have the equivalent former. This is just going to be, this piece I guess I can make from 16th plywood to hold. All this part is going to do is actually receive the blind nut. Now what's nice about this, once this pin, this will line this up, the only dimension I'll be off in is this, and I can hopefully drill both holes at the same time. I'm going to try to do, I laid this out an 1/8 inch light ply because I need the thickness of the blind nut here. So what I'll do, I'll just cut this former away. I don't need that former now. I have the same width, in fact it sticks there. It's got the nice fit that I want. Get rid of this one, get this one on here nice and flush, and that should be ready. Now, of course, because I'm on plywood, I've got to get rid of all the old wood and glue. Make sure I haven't lost any of my dimension. And I want it even with the back piece. A good way to make sure you have this level is just rest something flat against the back of it. Actually, figuring out all these little bulkheads and blind nuts, it's challenging. It's a nice way of saying it's a pain. Now obviously the next step is I have to make the corresponding part. I'll use the same material in here. I love the way this lines up. This piece out of here just to use as a rough pattern so I can trace this out onto the 1/8 inch light ply. Just save me a little time figuring out all the dimensions. It would be nice if I could somehow line these up and drill through both of them at the same time. That's what I'm going to try to figure a way. Maybe I can put a little clamp on that. Okay, brain surgeon, figure this out. I want these lined up. I want to be able to drill them. See, it's the little things you don't think you need to know until it comes time to do them. Then I want to line these up. I don't want to have them crooked. Let's see if we can just clamp it that way. Nope, the clamp is not big enough. There we go. Okay, that looks like it'll work. You would think with 10,000 things I'd be able to find a 256 screw and a blind nut. I gotta look for half an hour to find a nut here. The things I want to get is nice, hard, solid edges, so I made some little strips of 64th plywood. Now, just like anything else, the way you want to make an edge is use one edge to set the other edge up. So this is holding it in place here up against that edge. Now I can just tack glue it in position. And when I take that away, what's going to happen, the front edge is holding this edge in position. So in effect I should have a nice square tight edge. This piece out, you don't want to do this while it's right in position. That's just tacked in. And I just have a little edge, and I'll go around both sides, and I'll have what I hope will be two nice 64th edges. In other words, once you have one edge, doesn't matter if they're once one edge is there and you put the other edge up together, you can put a piece of wax paper in between, piece of Teflon, but in this case we're just tack gluing it in. Now once that's all sanded and ground down, those two edges should come together relatively nice. Now before I even put it back in, see the little gap that was there? See, there's a little gap. It fills with sawdust automatically, and when you put the second layer of CA on there, you just hit it with a Q-tip. And this, by the way, this technology, if you go back and look at the Spitfire, the cowling, all of those tapes, they have this technology on it where there's as many edges, now a stab is going to be here so we don't need to do that, as many edges as possible. 64th plywood, and you don't, when you're finishing a model, you don't wind up with all those little dings and then it looks like you had a mouse inside or a rat or something eating up the parts on you. As I do this side, I'm starting to get where all of the edges are nice and square now. Okay, after all that work, now the only thing left is this little ridge that I need to sand down here. Do that over by the sanding bench and we're done for the night. We're going to hug him and kiss him and put him to sleep and everything. And I have to figure out how I want to access that screw. I can see already that that's going to be a little bit of a nuisance. Maybe I have to do it Cassie's way through the side, Paul's way through the back. I'm not sure I know exactly how I want to do that yet, but we'll have to think about that tonight. But this really was a productive day. Now today's job, I want to lay out the actual rudder. Now you would think it would be kind of simple. One of the defining features of the plane is the rudder, and you would just say, well, get a photo enlarger, throw it up on a wall. You can see it has a relatively large rudder. It's an H model Mustang rudder. I just wanted to show a picture of this aeroplane here because I want to do a little storyboard before we go make up our rudder template. Keep in mind what this plane looks like. See how big the rudder is? Now that aeroplane, I made two of them. One was called a Killer Bee. That way it became a 5th place plane at the Nats. And I want to show how when you get carried away with a design, when you're flying a plane, this is called weather vaning. And it's really something that not a lot of people really understand. In fact, I didn't understand it until I built this plane. This plane had a real large rudder. I'm just going to make this overdo it. Well, what happens is the plane is always pivoting on its center of gravity, and as it goes into the wind, you can see what happens. The plane is here, the wind is blowing, and it'll do this. Obviously, it's real nice. It gains extra tension when it's upwind. But what happens when it's downwind, where you're going to do the maneuvers, that extra side area, guess what happens? It's working against you. So I came up with a conclusion that I never wanted to build another plane with a big rudder. The whole BJ series of planes with the large rudder, they used to weather vane like crazy. So I got so aggravated one day I went to the field, took out the Zona saw, and Big Jim went wild when I did this. He couldn't believe I just took a plane that was all buffed out. I cut off about a ½ inch of rudder. It got a little bit better. Got out the Zona saw, cut out another piece. I said, eventually, I'll figure this out. Hey, it even got better. Cut off another piece. I said, holy crow. Well, I was saving all these little pieces too. Then I cut off another piece, and I was getting down to having almost no rudder here, and it was getting just a little bit better. I took another hunk off, and we were doing this at Flushing on a really windy day. And right about there, at some point in time, it stopped weather vaning. It just would go upwind smooth, come downwind smooth, had nice tension overhead. And I said, well, let's face it now, I got to repair the plane anyway, I'm going to have to repaint the rudder. So I cut a little more off. And guess what happened? It got worse. So I went home, took this little piece, glued it back on, took these pieces and threw them away, and came up with what to me is now the formula that I use. And this is a proprietary formula. Each person has his own formula, something that he feels works for him. They're not all going to be the same. Billy Werwidge is not going to be the same as Ted Fancher. And what I did is I calculated out with a grid how many square inches were ahead of the center of gravity and how many square inches were behind the center of gravity. Now, thinking I'd have a number like, 50 and 100 or something, well, it's not. Because in other words, if you have square inches behind the center of gravity or in front of it, and it's thin in the middle, it's different than if you have this. So it's where the square inches are also that happens. But from the experience, and I thought I had a magic formula, but I don't. what I did is I took every plane that I knew instinctively had a weather vaning tendency. The Red Baron happened to be one of them. Tsunami happened to be one of them. And I went and did that calculation again. And I found out what to me is a rational balance point. In other words, if the plane started to look like this and got real skinny in the back, it would weather vane in the opposite direction. But there is clearly a balance point, and it's a personal thing. It's like fitting shoes. But for me, I know if I were to build Miss Ashley with this big scale-like rudder, I know what would happen. Halfway through the season, that top it, and then some more would, and pretty soon I'd be landlocked into having another experimental plane. Well, I kind of circumvented this because on this take-apart plane, I could make this whole little piece that I made yesterday. Just make it over with a smaller rudder. But that's not the point. I really would like to get it as close to possible. I've gone back and forth with Elliot, making the rudder bigger and smaller and bigger and wider, smaller and more scale, less scale. So it is really a complex thing to get the rudder right. Now, the odds are good that it won't be exactly right on the first plane. But if the first plane has a tendency to weather vane, for instance, this is one of the choices, and again, we're doing a take-apart plane. One of the choices I'll have is, rather than cutting the whole rudder off, I can go and make another little back piece with a rudder that's just the same shape but just a little bit smaller all around. So I've not landlocked myself into this, and because I have this removable piece that I can make, well, actually in one day, what I really feel is I can be a little more risky in making the rudder larger and more scale-like. Again, time is going to tell if I get this right on the first shot or not. If you happen to look at, here's the twin sister to that plane. Look how big the rudder wound up on the Walker fly-off day. This is the Walker fly-off picture from '95. Take a look at, same plane, same design. Look at the rudder. And it was at that level that it really, at least in my case, it stopped its tendency to weather vane. This was a top 5 plane, concourse winner, and a weather vaner until that rudder was cut down. So I have this choice that I can be a little more high risk. I can make it a little bit bigger. So now it's in the artist's eye. Now it's a back and forth. It's really not something you can feed into a computer, even though I'm sure people think they can, or maybe they can, and I just don't know it. But I'm going to really, this is the mind's eye. Can't do it with a photocopier. This is the kind of thing where it's just, hey, you try to make it look as realistic as possible. And of course we'll be doing the same thing when it comes to things like the belly scoop here, the landing gear. You can't really make some of these, the canopy. A lot of these things have to be interpolated. It is the real Strega rudder. That's a real P51. The rudder to scoop on real Strega. Now notice the difference on the extended rudder. It's the Red Baron in the last year before. This is just before it crashed. In fact, this photo was taken with the Michelob sponsorship. That was just before it crashed. Now Jimmy Casal built this plane. This was the 85 plane, I'm sorry. Jimmy built 3 of them this year, I think. He won the Nats. He won it because he was a very talented, hard-working person, and I don't think he won because he was a tremendous designer, a builder. But I remember flying this plane and thinking, holy crow, what a turkey. This guy is really some good pilot to fly this. And we both switched planes, flew each other's plane, and I remember thinking, boy, I was so lucky to have done that experiment and get that right. And from this point on, and this is the bottom line here, from this plane on, Jimmy never built another plane without a rudder. That was the last one. So I guess there's some kind of a message there. Now the nice thing is if you're not building a scale plane, you can just really improvise. But when it comes time to making a scale plane, now you kind of have to pay a little bit of a price. And again, it's that compromise that all semi-scale planes are. There's always a compromise. Now I think one of the better compromises that I came up with over the years, and it's the same formula I still use on planes like this, was Strega. Strega seems to have no weather vaning crazy tendencies at all. and it's a real balanced look while it's flying. So this is one of the things we're going to try to get as close to Strega as possible and still have the Miss Ashley look. Now for anybody that really is interested, and if you really are interested, I still have the video available of when I took Tsunami and just cut a whole bunch off the back of the tail. Cut about 2 inches off, repaired it, repainted it, made it a world better plane. So again, these are all personal choice things, and they all have to take into account the compromise factor. If you go back and read the old flying models columns on this plane, what I had done is added side area. I think for a plane with 900 square inches, this was a bit on a small side. I added things similar to what Bob Gieske and Eddie Elastic have, these little tip end rudders, and it improved the plane a whole lot as far as the tracking went. But again, here's that same old plane we started our rudder experiments with. Oh, what a dumb looking guy that is. Jeez, the Blues Brothers. Anyway, the reason I'm saying this is something that you don't read about in magazines a whole lot. It's not published very often, but it's a true thing. Balancing the side area to a number that you feel comfortable with. Once you have that number, you want to repeat it as close as possible on future designs. Another thing I learned, and it was very significant, these are significant things you need to take into account. This, I believe, right here is the last plane, well, the next to the last one I ever made without a Rabe rudder. Now what I found is, when I had a Rabe rudder, that little movable piece of rudder hooked to the elevators, and I had retrofitted about, well, almost every plane here has been retrofitted, that I could get away with having a bigger rudder, more tracking stability, and still have the tension and outside maneuvers in the top of the hourglass. And several of the planes that I had, this one in particular that had no Rabe rudder, and once I put a Rabe rudder on it, this became a much better flying plane. So we're obviously not going to abandon that approach. That has worked real well over the years. Now you can see early in my design career, this is one of my first published designs, 1967. Look how big that rudder is, and boy, talk about see, back then I didn't understand about weather vaning. I just thought I had no Rabe rudder, I had an adjustable pin adjustable rudder, and of course a Super Tiger 60. I didn't understand what was happening. I couldn't figure it out. But if I knew back then, I could have just made that rudder a little bit smaller. Boy, I would have been light years ahead of the game. I just didn't know. Now, when I flew Kent Ticer's Strega, I knew right away he had this wired. The side view of this plane that presents to the pilot while it's flying, with that big belly scoop, I remember flying this at Brodax, just unbelievable. This is about, the only criticism I have of Kent's side view is that the canopy looks a little bit too big, but hey, that's all personal stuff, that's shoelaces. Of course, my hat is off to Al Rabe for really the smallest amount of compromise I've ever seen on any semi-scale design. That's about as scale as it gets. Anyway, off to the drawing board, off to the balsa board. Of course, I hope you can use that little information when you're, coming up with your own design. If you're kind of compromising somebody else's design, designing your own, compromising a semi-scale plane, or, whatever. That weather vaning thing is something you need to take into account. It's a real factor if you're going to fly in the wind. And it would be cool, of course, if we could build a more scale-like model, but believe me, I hate to make these compromises. I would love to just photo enlarge this sucker up, but I know I'd pay, again. One of the planes, I think I got it right on the first time, was the Brodak Cardinal. So anyway, I'm getting itchy to build. Let's go get Dusty. One of the things I learned the hard way many times is never make the rudder exactly as long as you think it should be. Always make it an eighth, a quarter inch longer, because when you put this final little piece in here, and we obviously don't have that piece handy yet, then I want to do a final sanding just like a wingtip. I want to sand that curve in. So I'll just leave this extra material down here for right now until I have this piece, so I have a real custom nice tight fit. I also want to leave, and I'm going to pull this fuselage down, I want to make this that it goes into the fuselage just a bit. So this will be another little additional area, tongue area. And I've copied this pretty much off of the plans Elliot drew while he was here. But just get that feel for, boy, and I'll tell you, you could go back and forth 1,000 times with this, and hopefully we'll get it as close as we can. Now, of course, I want to cut the patterns and leave a little bit more than the pen line on. Okay, now, of course, we need to transpose this onto balsa. Now, the point is, up here, I want the grain going in this direction. So I want to do this. I want the grain going this way. This piece, I want the grain going parallel to the leading edge. And this piece, I want it going parallel to the hinge line. So I'm going to look around for some real nice light wood. First off, this is a big rudder, and it's going to be way in the back of the plane. I'm going to look for the lightest piece of wood that I can find. I'm looking for a piece of 1/4 inch, and I'm going to do a lot of sanding and carving on it, so it'll probably wind up around 3/16 of an inch. But getting the grain, laying out these pieces and getting the grain. You wouldn't want to make this with the grain going this way. This little piece would bust right off. The considerations, I want to have this 90 degrees to my thrust line. I don't want a hinge line that's back or forward. I want 90 degrees. Again, I want that little tongue on there, and I want to leave a little extra down here at the bottom. And so that'll give me a lot of choices. Now, I wanted to compare just for an idea. This is from Gerald Shamp's scale Mustang that we have the rudder for. Just see how close we are. And it looks like we're certainly in the ballpark area-wise. In fact, Gerald's maybe just a little bit more side area. The one we have is a little bit thinner. Just to see if we're in the ballpark. Okay, this was our original pattern made out of white paper. And I made a second copy because I want to see, I moved this piece up, did a little adjusting up here. Again, I just wasn't satisfied. I just kept spending, and I've spent a lot of time on this, believe me. That is one final thing. When I was all done, I noticed I didn't have this curve right. I didn't have this point right. And what I wasn't happy with, and I had to redo it, was this piece up here, and then blend it in. Believe me. You're looking at this like it was 5 minutes. This was a long, drawn out. I'm finally, well, not really satisfied. An artist can never be satisfied. I wanted to be sure with this new radius. I'm going to try to end the radius right at the split point of the block. That might, if I can make that work. I want to leave a little material in here so I can do the carving and get this grain not parallel to this, because then this edge becomes hard to finish, but just maybe about halfway, 20-30 degrees along this little curvature here. This looks about right, and we're ready to start carving balsa wood at last. I've marked on each piece which way I want the grain. That's for Elliot's reference when he does the plans. And carefully laid out with just about the grain angle. I tried to capture the most sea grain because this top of the rudder is going to be vulnerable. That's going to be, people are going to walk by and kick it like a football anyway. Grain going parallel to the leading edge. So now it's just a question of cutting these parts out. Alright, next step, tack glue them all together and we can start shaping this part out. Now here's a good little trick. You can either use, this is a piece of sheet Teflon, a nice little trick you can use over and over again. Now I want to try to glue this. If I were to glue this on, say on a piece of glass or something to get a nice flat surface, what happens? It sticks and chunks pull up and everything. So what I'm trying to do here, because it's an end grain joint, I'll use thick CA. And what happens when you do it this way, now we've got to hold this for a minute or so, the Teflon keeps it from sticking to the table. And if you need a sheet of this, I'll be glad to send anybody some, you know, just let me know. Dave was gracious enough to give me plenty. Take it up. There's nothing to do on the other side. There's no slime or anything. It just doesn't stick to the Teflon. Of course, for the next piece, move it over. Okay, it's all tack glued together now. I want to sand it as one unit. I want to do all the shaping, airfoiling, all as one unit. Piece all glued together, this way I'll be able to get a matching airfoil. I want to get a center line using my finger right down the whole part with one of my amazing pens that writes every time. I just have these tack glued together, so I just hope they're going to stay in position while I'm doing this. Now what I did, I used 1/4 inch. I was originally going to try to use 13/16 or 3/16, 3/16. Problem was I didn't have any that was really nice with the grain going the way I wanted it. This part I don't even have to worry about. That's going to get buried in a plane and sanded away, but I want to work off a center line. It's amazing how much time goes into just one little part like this. Wow. Unbelievable. A roll of sandpaper always is handy for trying. First I want to get the 90-degree edges all set. I guess the easiest way here is to use your finger the same way as you put the center line on to guide the knife. Try not to cut too many fingers off. I try to do as much as I can with the sanding block. Of course, the final little airfoil, like up here, I can see this is going to be a nuisance right now. Sometimes getting these edges to match can be a little, well, that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it challenging. If you're not challenged by any of this, well, I don't know. You know, when I'm carving into the grain where the grain is going this way, you never want to go 90 degree to the grain. It just tears it all up. So you can kind of hold the knife on a, I don't know. See, some of these things I do without thinking about them, so I'm not real good about including them in on the video. I just don't think about them enough. Try to get the roughed out shape here anyway. I can see we're going to be sanding through some glue joints here. That's going to be a challenge. And this part we're going to try to get to disappear right into that. And if we're real lucky, this will come out in the front. What amounts to be the front of the, where we're going to take that little part off the back of the fuselage. Now the second time we do this, of course, it'll go a lot quicker because we already have the patterns made. It'll just be a case of replicating it. But that original thought I had of having that one piece that would plug into the carbon, yeah, you know, sometimes I wish I did have it. Well, again, about getting most of the material off with a knife, then a last little sanding, and I'll get a, well, let's hope I get a good fit around that little counterbalancer. And I can really thin this out as we get to the top. It's another advantage here. The sander to get some of this rough shaping done too. The orbital sander we got for Christmas. way, this is good. Just thinking of something I haven't put on a video. This is good for knocking out what I used it for before. Lay this on a flat surface. A router pad is good, and it knocks out the glue joints instantly. Well, the other final thing I don't think I put on the video is when I want to get a trailing edge lining up with that center line, I have a block of just scrap softwood. Line that trailing edge right up with the very edge and use that as a guide. When you try to hold it in your bare hands, you just wind up with like a river. Even for flaps, this is a good way. Rudders. And then obviously, once you get one side coming up to the line, get all the dust off. Flip this over. We're trying to get a nice blend between the rudder it's all sanded out. These edges become very vulnerable, so one of the things as soon as I get the shape or real close to the shape I want to harden up all the edges. Then go back, sand it very lightly, and repeat this 4 or 5 times, and I'll have a nice hard edge right on the edge. Because this edge right here, you know, somebody's going to launch the plane and put a wedding ring or a who the hell knows what into it. Every plane I have, they hold a plane and ginch the heck out of it. Anyway, hardening up all the edges. Go back over it 3 or 4 times. It's a good way to at least give yourself some fighting chance that by the time you get to your concourse judging, the thing isn't going to have ring marks in it. This is one of the hardest areas I find is when you have grain going in this direction, is to get that smooth transition. And the best way I know is just harden up the area first with the thin CA. And let's see if we can get this up real close. You can see how this kind of a motion will make that transition real nice. Now once you get it hard, of course, it's already got a couple of coats of thin CA because I didn't want to make this take 10 minutes for this demo. Okay, just want to get that hardened up. Let it kick by itself. This is a good way, any of these transitions that you have. And obviously you can fine tune the diameter. Just peel off some sandpaper or add some. And getting that real nice. That's one of the real focal points of a plane. When you look in there and you see that, when that's nice and smooth, where the light just comes right off of that. Things I want to do too, I'm looking for all the little weak areas that are going to take a beating here. I want to take a piece of 64th plywood on edge. Just make what amounts to a little rib there. Again, that 64th plywood makes for a really nice edge wherever you want to have a nice edge. The next step, now see here, watch what happens when this hinge, what I need to put is a little curved piece in here, a little piece with a relief to make this more scale-like. And if we're going to put these details into the plane, if we're going to do artwork, let's do artwork. Let's not leave out any details. Now it's hard to carve that in, but I can carve it in ahead of time and then just glue a piece in there. That always seems to work a little better. And that would be just the exact opposite of this piece. So I just need to make a little impression of this. See, this is relatively easy to do. Just make a little impression of this. Now I know how much that radius should be. I have that little relief in there. I made a couple of little test pieces. I realize I have almost the right dimension in a polywog. Again, I want that little curved area. Again, it's just a little detail, but all these little details, when you think of all the little details there are in a semi-scale plane, if you're going to do artwork, This is what separates this from the you know, flat wing stunners. I want to have exactly that right amount of clearance. Oh, look at this phone ringing. Can you believe this? That clearance is set. Just trim off the extra. Little details, and there's going to be hundreds of them on this plane. Now the final little fit, of course I put the hinges in next. That final little fit when that swings, I want to see how that's going to fit. Boy, you know, speaking of little details, that Black Widow of Charlie Chambers, I was looking at that and videotaping it, and there are just like little things like this. There's just 1,000 of these little details, and you walk by and you don't really see them, and you have to look closer and closer and closer to it. Believe me, people notice these little details. They know that you don't think they know. You think, oh, that's a lot of work, nobody will ever notice it. Baloney, they notice it right away. They notice all these little things like cowl fits, edges. Guys, appearance point the plane, they go like that. Yep. That's what I like really put a lot of emphasis on having nice edges. These are all hardened with CA, and I have some of these, the ones that are going to take a beating, hardened up with 64th plywood. The same as we did the flaps, I'm going to taper that edge down, mark out the hinge pockets, and I need a center line to work with. A little detail like this is real important too. Where that little counterbalancer comes out, there's just ever so little taper, even though we're not going to have a hinge up there. And it's always a good idea, lay a piece of tape in, put the edge tape on, and then peel the original piece out. Exactly the same as we did the flaps, no difference. Remember that little recess there? All these little, I call them Charlie Chamber details. Deal, I have just enough of these, these are the small ones, Dubro 119. And I have some that are dyed black. I want to ultimately use the black ones, but I can use the white ones for setting this up. And I can just lay this out. See how many hinges I'm going to need in here. Just keep thinking I'm going to have more of these. Just don't have enough of these. Now see what I do, I try to lay out the end of the tool. You can make your own little hinge pocket tool for these half A hinges. Just run a parting wheel up at a little bit of an angle. It makes like a fish hook. And this is real handy when it comes time to gouge out these pockets and get out the last little bit of material. You can see how quickly that comes out. The fit that I always look for is I want to be able to press the hinge in, turn it over, and not have the hinge fall out. But I don't want it to push in hard. Because what happens if you push it in hard, this tends to swell, and after you buff the whole plane out, you go to put the hinges in, you shove this in, and it makes you sick. So having that little tool to gouge it out, especially these little half A guys, kind of a critical thing. I just hate those little puckers. Well, like every part of this plane, it's taken longer than we expected, but we have the rudder finished. And in the next session, we're going to get it installed right into the little tailpiece. But that's all we have time on the video for today. Hey, and thanks a lot for joining us. Hope to see you on the next tape. And it seems like every time we work on it now, it gets more and more like the airplane we have envisioned. We got to do the canopy. It's really starting to look like an airplane. This is the part where it really starts to get fun. Anyway, we've finished out this tape. We got a couple other little things to put on the very end, but if it runs out in the middle of them, you know, we're just trying to fill up the end of the last minute or two of tape. And again, thanks for joining us. Please share the tapes. Today's mail, and believe me, we're at the end of the tape. I just want to see what's in the box. I hope this is my vacuum bag and stuff. From Dave Midgley, and it sure is. And one of the things, believe me, a project like Miss Ashley is not a one-man thing. It's a lot of people have contributed a lot of extra time and energy, spare, mostly technology, and Dave is one of the ones. Maybe I fail to thank him enough. We're going to be set up to do vacuum bagging and mass production here very soon. I can see we have all the bag ends, maybe a dozen or so bags, and the furls. These are the things I needed. Anyway, getting involved in a new type of modeling, you can always use, now see, what I wish is there was some other Windy that already did this and I could buy the video. Or even better, borrow the video. But anyway, Dave has been just better than good. I want to look at that Frank McMillan box. That's been sitting there for a couple of days. I've been afraid to open it. I know what's in it. There's a set of wings in there. Frank would be not be filling the box with packing peanuts. Guess what? Good thing I didn't just pull it apart. Oh my God, packing peanut heaven. Oh my God. If you ever open these on a windy day, everybody in your neighborhood gets packing. I know there's wings in there though. Hello? Where are those wings? You see, one day I opened one of these, they're going everywhere. One day I opened one of these bags outside. Every neighbor, oh my God, these are Frank's revenge. Anyway, I really appreciate that Dave Midgley is already making up a plug for a wing. And this is a plane that had some kind of mechanical failure. And Frank, being the gentleman that he is, knows that we may get some value out of this. I hope so. Anyway, we're going to be looking at this. Look at this. He sawed the nose right. That's pretty cool. Anyway, Frank, I really appreciate this. We're going to, as Dave works on the molds for the carbon wings, believe me, before the year's out, we may have carbon. We don't know what we're going to have. This is the most unbelievable season I've ever had. Wing broke just, I'm going to have to ask Frank what happened here. Like the wing, maybe it just crashed. It's got some damage out here, but see, now we could really use this if we want to do a test mold. Everything else is in good condition too. Anyway, believe me, a project like this, one person isn't going to, a team is the way to work. And people like Dave Midgley, Ed Gallagher, Dennis Toth, Wayne Triven, let me leave somebody out. Everybody that's contributed to this project. This is the fun of modeling. This is what, in essence, this is what it's all about. This is model aviation. This is what the people at Reno go through, only when it doesn't work for them. When this happens at Reno, you get killed. That's why I love model planes. I just love model planes. 4 hours with the shop vac now. Texas snow. You believe this? Laughing now. Frank, I love this Texas snow. Anytime you're not happy with model planes and you think, oh, it's frustrating, gee whiz, my finish isn't buffing out the way I like. See, this is what I did before I got back into model planes. I did a lot of this. You want to know something? This is the dead truth too. In the AMAR championships, I was 5th. I know everybody's going to think that's, of course there were only 4 other riders. Anyway, look at this. Even during motorcycle crashes, the phone rings, boy. Just great to be the owner of a multinational business. Unbelievable. Stay with model planes. Again, we got so many things going on in this shop right now. Carbon and wood and planes and Brodak dope. By the way, Midgley tested that candy apple dope sample from Brodak. Candy apple colors are coming, maybe carbon fiber wings. One way or another, we don't know what's coming, but it's certainly been an adventure. And thanks to everybody that's contributed and helped and shared. It's really what this whole thing is all about.
This final air racing tape of the century is dedicated to unlimited air race pilot Gary Levitz, who lost his life while passionately pursuing his love of air racing. Skyfire is producing a special video dedicated to Gary's colorful life and air racing career. We also dedicate this tape to Janet Sandberg, who followed in her father's footsteps to serve air racing and the aviation community. A beautiful flower cut down in the spring of her life through the ravages of cancer.
As much as I love this stuff, I still love modeling better, believe me. A lot of good reasons to love model planes. See you on the next take. Yeah, boy, there are just a lot of good reasons. Think about it. Not kidding, there's a lot of great reasons I love model aviation. And Joe Adamusco's one of them, boy. Great seeing him over the holiday season. Can't wait to start working on a canopy. We're going to probably start the canopy on the next tape too. These little fillets in the tail, now that we have the rudder done. So many loose ends, so many reasons to like model aviation.